The dictionary definition of linguistics is the scientific study of language. Now, even though these neat, concise definitions exist, I find that many people are still confused and have many misconceptions about what linguistics is in reality. So they might have a lot of false beliefs about linguistics. So in today's video, I wanted to use a personal analogy of comparing languages to animals from the point of view of a biologist and a linguist to show how similar they are. Because linguistics is a science, and so there are many analogies that you can find between linguistics and biology, contrary to, for example, linguistics and literature. So even though linguistics, linguists may be concerned with certain aspects of literature, you cannot confuse the two for being the same. So, we have a picture of a dog, and we have a picture on the right that is supposed to represent the concept of a language, and that's what we are going to talk about today. We are going to use this little analogy I came up with to explain the similarities between them. So, just as we can see on the left, just as we have many dog breeds, we also have many languages in the world. Many different languages exist, and some of them can be relatively similar, such as Spanish and Italian compared to each other, and some of them can be vastly different, such as German and Chinese. So what does this part of our analogy actually tell us about language and linguistics? So a linguist can quantify the number of speakers of a certain language. So that would be the same as quantifying the total population of a certain dog species, a certain dog breed. We can also count how many languages there are overall in the world. So the answer to that question is that there are around 7,000 languages in the world. However, the answer to this question is not as straightforward as we will see in the next slide. On the next slide. So, a linguist can also ask the question of what constitutes a language. So, what is a language? On the left, we can see two dogs of the same breed. I think it's King Charles Spaniel Cavalier. And even though the phenotype, so the way these two dogs look, is slightly different, mainly due to the difference in color, we have a white ginger, white orange, or white brown dog at the top, and a black brown dog at the bottom. So they are slightly different, but it would be insane to think that they are completely different breeds just because of difference in color. On the right hand side, we have a King Charles Spaniel, so not a Cavalier, and we can see a clear difference this time round between the dogs on the left and the dog on the right because of the difference in snout morphology, so the way the snout looks. So we can consider the one on the right to be a different breed, and then if we also imagine what a German Shepherd looks like, we can see a clear difference between certain dog breeds, but you can also see the vast similarities between some other breeds, such as King Charles Spaniel Cavalier and King Charles Spaniel. So, how does this compare to language? So we have languages and we have dialects. A dialect is considered to be a variation, the local version of a certain language. So it's like a subset of the same language, whereas two languages are supposed to be two separate languages. I know the terminology might not be very helpful here, But we have dialects and we have languages, and a dialect is like a subset, a slightly different version. So just as on the left we have slightly different versions of the same dog breed that's different mainly in color. That's what dialects are. Whereas when we compare these two dialects to the dog on the right, that's like having two separate languages. Now, the branch of linguistics, the discipline of linguistics that deals with these kind of questions is dialectology. And dialectology is a subset, it's a branch of social linguistics. So the aspect of linguistics that deals with studying language in its socio-cultural context. Now, another little fun comparison is language conservation. So the same way that we have many animal species going extinct, especially in the 21st century, we also have many languages being endangered or just going extinct. So many languages nowadays are endangered and might basically die, which is a very sad way to put it, but sadly that's what may happen to these languages. So linguists and language conservationists can go over lists of languages and look at many socio-cultural and environmental factors to determine whether these languages are at risk of going extinct. And we can also answer the question, how can we help the language survive? So language conservationists are linguists who are specialists in making up programs and policy and advising policy making to allow for survival of minority languages. One such example is the Hawaiian language, spoken in Hawaii, which is endangered sadly. And another example is Hebrew, which was actually extinct for over 1,000 years, but in recent decades, due to there being a country of Israel, some people decided to revive the language. So that would be comparable to having the genetic DNA of a mammoth, and then employing some geneticists to actually clone him back into existence. So modern Hebrew looked at the many inscriptions we have of ancient Hebrew to inform how it should be spoken. So here we have language policy making, and we also have a figure on global language endangerment. So it basically goes on to illustrate for you that the same way we can classify animals into different stages of endangerment, we can do the same for languages. So slightly more about social linguistics, so certain things I wanted to point out is that social linguistics not only deals with language conservation and but also with other aspects such as how speakers of a certain language, of a certain dialect, perceive other speakers of different languages and different dialects. So in certain areas, a certain language can be perceived as being the prestige language that is supposed to be better than other languages, even though from a linguistical point of view there is absolutely no scientific basis for anyone to think that one language is better than another. It might be a subjective opinion of subjective taste, but certainly you cannot assert it in any scientific manner. Social linguistics also studies languages within their social context. So, for example, coming back to the idea of prestige language, English can be considered a prestige language in many areas of sub-Saharan Africa, for example, especially West Africa, I would say. Or Spanish is considered to be the prestige language, so the language worth learning among many indigenous communities in South America. And that is an environmental factor that drives language extinction and language endangerment. So, for example, there are less speakers of many native indigenous American languages such as Quechua, because Spanish is just considered to be better and more, it has more prestige, because partially because it's easy to find a job with Spanish speaking abilities. Social linguistics also deals with studying not only languages and dialects, but sociolects and language registers. Sociolects are the variations of language, of the same language spoken among different groups within a society. So, for example, someone from an upper middle class upbringing might speak slightly differently than someone from a low income family. These are just certain differences that exist between these two sociolects. So a sociolect is like a dialect, but for different groups within society. And language registers are just different versions of speech, more to do with stylistics, let's say, that we use depending on whom we're speaking with. So, for example, you won't be speaking to your boss the same way you speak to your child. These are the different language registers, so we can think of it as formal and informal language. And social linguistics also deals with culture and language minorities within the societal context. So linking to that is the book that I am currently reading. It's called Linguanomics, and just as the book cover says, it's about exploring the connection between the economical potential of multilingualism and just language diversity. Personally, to be honest, I'm not very happy with the book, but if you want me to give you a more detailed review, then just type in the comments and I'll make that happen. By the way, I'm really sorry for the slow transition between the slides. My apologies for that. But here we have the same dog, and now we are going to explore or define a slightly more complex, slightly more difficult, let's say, aspect of linguistics. So the same way. So previously we were talking about dogs and dog breeds and animals as populations, basically as parts of a greater whole. Here we are actually talking about the anatomy of animals and the anatomy of language. So syntax is like a skeleton. It's like a bone structure of a language. It's perhaps more commonly thought of as grammar. Syntax basically can be equated to grammar in most contexts. So here we have we is happy. That's grammatically incorrect. Here we have an example of an incorrect syntax. So this can be compared to, for example, how certain animals can be born with with certain skeleton deficiencies, let's say, just the wrong bone structure, and that leads to many problems. The same way, if you are using an incorrect syntax, then that will lead to people not understanding exactly what you mean. Now, morphology is referring to smaller units and their arrangement. So that's like having small bone parts or small organs and studying how they link together to make up a system. So, for example, how the smaller parts of an animal's heart combine to make up the organ. And in context of linguistics, we have the word undeniable that is actually made up of 3 different morphemes. Morphemes are just the smallest units that convey any meaning. So we have meaning not, deny, and able to make up the word undeniable. And finally, phonetics and phonology. That's like, for example, having there's like your dog barking, for example. So it refers to the sounds we make. That's phonology and phonetics. Now, yet another branch of linguistics is evolutionary linguistics, and another one would be historical linguistics. So when it comes to animals, for example dogs, we can study how dogs evolved from wolves, for example, and study the common ancestor they share with wolves and other canines and other animals to arrive to find the common ancestor of these animals. And we can do the same for languages. For example, Spanish and Italian and also Portuguese, as well as other languages, have the common ancestor of Latin. And we can study the evolution of newer languages from the older languages. In a similar way, we can study the evolution of animals, and that allows us to draw trees, evolutionary trees, similar to the one we have on the left, to see exactly how different languages are related to one another. And we can also study how languages evolve, so we can study what kind of environmental factors lead to language evolution. So one example would be speakers of English being in close contact with speakers of Old French, and historically that meant that now in English we have a lot of words that come from French, or more specifically Old French, because of this language contact. So that was one factor that affected the evolution of English language to the one that we know today. And connected to that idea is the idea of language reconstruction. So we can only know a language based on studying the speech of native speakers, or by studying the writing produced by these native speakers. However, nowadays we don't have any native speakers of Latin, but we have the writing. But there are many languages that have never been written down, and we also don't have any native speakers left of these languages, which means that we have to resort to something called language reconstruction. So it's a linguistical method of trying to reconstruct a language that we actually don't have any records of. So here on the left we have different European and Indian languages, and how and this tree describes how ultimately they came from just a single language 10,000 years ago. So 10,000 years ago there was a language called Proto-Indo-European, and 10,000 years later we have all these different languages evolving from the original one. And here we have a map of how the word, the number 2, evolved from Proto-Indo-European at the center to all the modern Indo-European languages we have today. And on the right hand side I have highlighted the English word 2, so you can follow the arrows and see exactly what kind of journey, what kind of changes occurred over time to arrive at the word we have today. Another branch of linguistics is cognitive linguistics, and related to that there is neurolinguistics. Cognitive linguistics explores the connection between our mind, our thoughts, and language. Actually a lot of psychologists study something called psycholinguistics, and that's very similar to cognitive linguistics. And there are many theories about exactly what is the connection between our mind and our thoughts. One of the earliest theories trying to explain that is the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, which is very famous. I think that's probably the first thing that many people learn about linguistics in general. Neurolinguistics deals with how our brains process language to understand it, and also to produce speech. So before I say something and before I can process something that my friend is saying to me, my brain has to go through certain processes in order for that to work properly, in order for that to happen. And neurolinguistics is trying to exactly look at the connection between the different parts of the brain to explain that. In the same category, we have linguists trying to explain how children learn their native language and how students acquire a second language, and we call that language acquisition. And here we have a diagram of the brain. So that's the work of a neurolinguist who actually did a lot of experiments, and he tried to highlight all the parts of the brain that explicitly deal with language production, speech production, and language processing, language understanding, the comprehension of language. And in the frontal lobe we have something, it's actually not on the diagram, so I added it there in the orange rectangle. We have the Broca's area, which is essential in speech production, and if someone is born or if someone suffers brain damage to that area, then that may result in stuttering and aphasia, as well as other conditions that impact the way a person processes and produces speech. And yet another branch of linguistics is natural language processing and computational linguistics. So natural language processing is actually a subset of AI, artificial intelligence, and machine learning, so that's quite exciting. And the way I could summarize it in the easiest manner I possibly can is that's basically trying to use computers, use machines to I wouldn't say understand, but at least try to work with human language to arrive to a certain desirable result. So in this case, I think it's actually easier to just give examples of things that fall in that category. So spelling checks. So when you, for example, write in a Word document you might have a spelling error, and the word software already checks it for you, and it underlines it in red in case you made one, so you can correct your mistake. Also, word autofill, so when you start typing something in Google and the rest of the words just fills in magically. We have machine translation, so that's something like Google Translate, just translating from one language to another without having to use a human translator to do so. And sentiment analysis, so that's quite an exciting field. That's feeding a lot of data, a lot of articles, let's say a lot of text to a machine, and this machine tries to determine based on what is written whether the person writing the text has a positive sentiment or a negative sentiment. So that, for example, could be product reviews. The company can hire a linguist to perform probably not a single linguist, but a team of linguists to write a program to perform sentiment analysis to find out if people are liking their products or whether they dislike their products. And finally, forensic linguistics, which is solving crime with linguistics, which is so exciting. Here we have a photo of a letter written by Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber terrorist, and the way they were able to identify him was actually by analyzing the peculiarities in the way he wrote his letters in order to identify him and find him, because if they hadn't done that, then they probably wouldn't catch him, honestly. And there are also many more branches of linguistics. However, this is just an introductory video, and that's why I mentioned only the main ones that I think everyone should know about. So thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. However, it is my first video, so I'll admit that it's not of best quality, but hopefully if I see that people want me to make more videos, then I will improve. And if you have any suggestions, any comments, any improvements, please write them down in the comment section below. So thank you for watching.